I went to a tiny private school in South Jersey, starting in 4th grade all the way through my graduation. And for the larger chunk of those 8 years, life in my house was very tumultuous. But every day at school, there was this one bright light, no matter what was happening when I got home. And it always happened at the beginning of the day when the teacher decided who was going to be allowed to bring the attendance sheet into the office. And I would beg to be allowed to be the one, because inside the office there was the woman who was the secretary who sat at the front desk. Her name was Jean Smith, and because this was a very small school, even though Jean Smith's official job was to be the secretary, which she was very good at because she was extremely well organized, she also had the default job of being the school nurse, and finally the other default job of being the social worker. And I would come, when it was my turn, I would be allowed to take the attendance. I remember skipping down the hall because I could get 2 minutes, maybe even 3 minutes of Jean Smith's attention. And I don't remember any of the conversations we had. I just remember that she listened to me, and her voice was just sounded to me like sunshine. And it makes me think, I also grew up on a lake, and I used to watch the painted turtles sunning themselves on a log and just soaking in all of that warmth. And those 2 minutes for me always makes me think of those turtles. If I could just get those 2 minutes with Jean Smith, the rest of the day would be completely manageable. And this went on, I could tell you, and then I got to high school and I got mature, but it's not true. I still cherished any time that I got with Jean Smith. And she retired, and when she retired, I started writing letters to her, and she wrote back. And this has been going on now for about 32 years. And over the years, several things have happened. Jean Smith was diagnosed with lupus. She began to lose her sight. She has pretty crippling arthritis. Her husband of 50 years or more died, as did her best friend, and that's all happened in about the last 10 years. And I think that this summer I got one last letter from Jean Smith. I really think this is the last one that she's going to be able to write, because it takes her forever just to be able to write a letter because she's legally blind. And it's been rough. She's moved into an assisted care facility. And I've made it a point over the years that I will set aside at least one day in the craziness that is my life when I am going to drive outside to the suburb of Philadelphia, where she is living in her assisted care facility, and spend an afternoon with Jean Smith. And a few years back, I made this annual pilgrimage, and Jean Smith has never gotten to church. That's a whole different story, how I became a priest. That's been an interesting conversation with just about everybody in my life except you guys. But she does believe in community, and at this assisted care place where she's living, there had been some sort of workshop. And I think it was some kind of self-growth sort of workshop. And everybody in the room was asked to think of 3 qualities that made them uniquely special. And Jean was sitting there telling me about this workshop and what she thought of it, and I asked her what the 3 qualities were that she could think of about herself, and she said, the only thing I could think of is that I'm a good listener. And that's only because in the school she listened to all the students and teachers and parents, and then at this assisted care facility, literally every person above 80 who lives on her floor comes to her to share all of their problems. So her, like even post-retirement, her job is to listen to everybody, which she does, I'm sure, exactly the way she did for me, just making them feel warm and cared about. So, but that was the only thing she could think of. That was a quality that she had. And for some reason, I guess maybe because I was anxious about it, I couldn't think of anything else either. And I've loved this woman all of my life. And so we finished lunch. I had to get back in the car. And the whole way home, I'm thinking about, what is wrong with me? Why can't I come up with two other things besides good listener for Gene Smith? That doesn't make any sense. And I finally, about a third of the way home, the light bulb goes on. And I pull into an Acme parking lot because I don't want to forget, and I speed dial her, and she picks up the phone and says, "Hello?" And I say, "It's Laurie. You're kind, and you're loyal." There's this long pause. And Mrs. Smith says, "Laurie, those are your qualities." And I'm thinking, no, they're not. And then I'm thinking, wait a second. I've been writing to this woman for 30 years. I make a pilgrimage out to see her in Philadelphia once a year, and I've been agonizing over coming up with two things that are good about her. And I'm sitting in a parking lot on a phone in the Acme telling her about how good she is. And I suddenly realized, she's right. It just had never occurred to me. This morning is the gospel story of Bartimaeus. And Jesus has just been in Jericho. He's been renowned at this point as a great healer and a great teacher. And people are very excited to see him, and I'm sure that they want to make a good impression. And it does not help anything that on his way out of Jericho, headed towards Jerusalem, by the way, there is a blind beggar who is sitting on the street, yelling out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And all the town people are like, just shushing him, because everybody knows in ancient Palestine that the reason that somebody would be afflicted with blindness has to do with some problem they have in their relationship with God, some kind of sin. And so the last thing that people in Jericho want Jesus to associate with their community is this guy over on the side of the road begging for alms, this blind man. And so they're shushing him, telling him to keep quiet. And Bartimaeus won't give up. He just gets louder. And he says it again, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stops and tells the crowd to bring this man to him. And then the crowd suddenly changes disposition. Instead of wishing this guy would just go away, everybody focuses their attention on Bartimaeus. And somebody says, "Take heart, he's called you, get up and come to him." And so Bartimaeus is helped up to Jesus, and Jesus asks a question that every single one of us in our heart of hearts wishes Jesus would ask us in person. "What do you want me to do for you?" And Bartimaeus says, "Teacher, let me see." And Jesus says, "Your faith has made you well." And suddenly, Bartimaeus' eyes that were not working, suddenly the light goes into them and he's able to physically see again. And Jesus tells him to go. Bartimaeus doesn't go. Bartimaeus walks with the crowd that's walking with Jesus and becomes one of his disciples. And I imagine Bartimaeus walking with Jesus on his road to the cross to the very end. Here's the irony in this story. Bartimaeus does not call Jesus Rabbi when he's calling out on the side of the road where he's sitting and begging? Bartimaeus does not call Jesus healer. Bartimaeus is screaming at his top of his lungs, Son of David, which is a name for the Messiah. In Mark's Gospels, there are only very few characters who ever know that Jesus is the Messiah. And by chapter 10, there are only two. They are Peter, his best friend, and all of the demons know that Jesus is the Messiah. The only other character who knows is Bartimaeus, who is what? Blind. When Bartimaeus stands in front of Jesus and says, Master, let me see again, he does not know the truth about himself. He knows the truth about Jesus, but he does not know the truth about himself. Which is that the only person in that street on that morning that actually can see with 20/20 vision is Bartimaeus, because he knows who Jesus is. So he's regained this physical ability that had absolutely nothing to do with his being able to see. As he walks on his way to Jerusalem. What if that question that Jesus asks that we all long to hear, that question, what is it that you want me to do for you? What if the answer to that question was already inscribed on your soul the moment before you were even knit together in your mother's womb? What if that ultimate longing in your heart is just an imprint of the fingerprints of your Creator's hand upon you? And that holiness that you feel would complete you is already there. And that longing that you feel for it is just an answer that you have to be able to listen to inside of your own heart where Christ has always resided. Your Master already called you before you were born. Your Master already said, what do you want me to do for you? And answered that prayer in a much bigger way than perhaps you can see or imagine, in His love for you. It's all there. Maybe the main thing that we need to hear today is not Jesus' question, what is it you want me to do for you? But maybe it's what the crowd says to Bartimaeus, which is, get up and take heart. Your Master is calling you. Amen.